The Deathworlders were unlike any other species in the galaxy. Their home planet was a place where the weak did not survive, where the environment itself seemed designed to test every living creature's limits. Towering mountains with jagged peaks pierced the clouds, and endless deserts of black stone stretched for hundreds of miles, broken only by rivers of molten rock that could swallow a careless traveler in an instant. The seas were treacherous, filled with predators that moved as fast in water as some creatures did on land. The forests were dense, dangerous labyrinths, where giant carnivorous plants and agile hunting beasts struck without warning. Life on this world was brutal, unrelenting, and it had shaped the Deathworlders into a species that was strong, fast, intelligent, and merciless. From the moment a Deathworlder was born, survival became a lesson. Infants were left for short periods in controlled environments with minor predators, not enough to kill, but enough to teach alertness and reflexes. Children learned to fight from the earliest age, to move silently through dangerous terrains, to observe their surroundings with extreme attention to detail. Their education was practical. Hunting, combat, strategy, and endurance were the subjects that mattered most. Weakness was not tolerated, and failure often had immediate consequences. This constant exposure to danger, combined with a natural intelligence honed by harsh conditions, produced a species whose soldiers could think, adapt, and execute with precision. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Deathworlders were not mindless killers. Their society valued intelligence as highly as strength. Leaders were chosen based on tactical brilliance and the ability to remain calm under pressure, not merely raw power. The Deathworlders believed that survival depended on foresight as much as muscle. Their fleet commanders, for instance, spent decades training in simulated battles, studying enemy tactics from across the galaxy, and learning every possible way to exploit weaknesses. Every mission was meticulously planned, and every soldier understood their role perfectly before any operation began. The combination of intellect, discipline, and raw power made the Deathworlders one of the most feared species in known space. Among the stars, rumors of the Deathworlders' capabilities traveled faster than lightships. Entire civilizations had learned to steer clear of Deathworlder space, knowing that even a minor offense could provoke catastrophic retaliation. Merchants and traders whispered about how a single Deathworlder warship could destroy an entire fleet if provoked. Scientists documented battles where Deathworlder tactics had turned hopeless situations into decisive victories. Most of the galaxy regarded them with a mix of awe and terror, respecting their strength but fearing the consequences of direct contact. It was said that if a Deathworlder came to your planet, the choice was simple: surrender and survive, or resist and perish. The Deathworlders themselves, however, were largely indifferent to such reputation. They did not seek conquest for glory or fame. Their actions were driven by pragmatism, survival instincts, and adherence to a cultural code that demanded respect for strength and efficiency. Warships were built to perform perfectly in combat, weapons were designed to achieve maximum impact, and their military strategies were formulated to leave no room for error. Civilizations that mistook the Deathworlders' fearsome capabilities for recklessness often learned their lesson the hard way. Every move the Deathworlders made in the galaxy was calculated, yet it appeared to outsiders as sudden, brutal, and unstoppably like a predator striking without warning. One quiet day, deep in the outer rim of the galaxy, the Deathworlder command centers intercepted a faint signal, a distress call, an SOS from a civilization whose planet was under attack. The signal was weak, barely making it past the communication interference of deep space, but it carried a sense of desperation that even a Deathworlder could recognize. The species that sent it was technologically primitive compared to the Death. Their fleets were small, their defenses weak, and their cities were under siege. The message begged for help, for a force strong enough to repel the attackers, a hand to turn the tide of a war that was already consuming lives. When the Deathworlder leaders examined the signal, they did so with a mixture of curiosity and strategic consideration. Unlike other civilizations that might have seen it as a plea for negotiation, the Deathworlders viewed it as an opportunity. The SOS came from a species that could not defend themselves adequately, but they still had value as a potential ally, as a civilization worth preserving, or as a test of Deathworlder tactical superiority. Yet there was caution as well. In the past, some SOS signals had been traps, baited to lure unsuspecting fleets into ambushes. The Deathworlders analyzed every aspect of the message: its origin, the surrounding star systems, the enemy's possible movements, and even the panic evident in the transmission. Nothing was left to chance. Once the assessment was complete, the decision was unanimous. The Deathworlders would respond to the SOS, but their response would not be a gentle intervention. In their culture, helping the weak meant ensuring survival through overwhelming force. They did not negotiate or compromise with enemies who threatened those who were unable to defend themselves. Their fleet would go, and when it arrived, it would bring not only aid but a demonstration of what it meant to challenge Deathworlder might. Orders were issued across their command networks, warships activated, engines roared to life, and soldiers prepared their armor and weapons. Pilots checked their systems, strategists reviewed the enemy positions, and commanders devised countless contingencies for every possible scenario. On their journey across the stars, the Deathworlder fleet moved with terrifying efficiency. Their ships glided through space in tight formation, coordinated as though guided by a single mind. Every crew member was aware of their role, every weapon system calibrated for precision strikes. As they approached the SOS planet, scouts sent ahead detailed information about enemy movements, planetary defenses, and civilian zones. The Deathworlders' method was methodical, combining the instincts of hunters with the planning of seasoned generals. By the time they arrived, they were not just a fleet, they were a force of nature, poised to reshape the battlefield with unmatched skill and power. The species sending the SOS had no experience with beings like the Death. They had only heard of tales, legends that seemed impossible. Their scientists and leaders speculated about what the Deathworlders could do, but nothing in theory could match the reality they were about to face. To the aliens, the arrival of the Deathworlder fleet was awe-inspiring and terrifying. Enormous warships, sleek and deadly, moved into orbit with silent authority. Weapon systems hummed with energy, ready to unleash devastation on any who dared oppose them. Every signal, every movement radiated efficiency and power. For the first time, the SOS species understood what it truly meant to be under the protection or scrutiny of one of the galaxy's most formidable forces. Even as the fleet approached, the Deathworlders maintained their culture of discipline. There were no celebrations, no displays of ego. Their interest lay solely in the mission: protect the weak, destroy the threats, and demonstrate the superiority of their tactics. They observed the battlefield, noted enemy positions, and prepared for immediate action. The SOS species could only watch, hoping the legendary creatures of myth and rumor would intervene in their favor, and indeed, they would, but in a way that was completely consistent with Deathworlder principles. Any enemy that had underestimated them would soon learn the cost of arrogance. This phase of their story set the stage for what was to come. The Deathworlders' background, their harsh upbringing, their disciplined culture, and their tactical genius all converged to create a species capable of responding to threats in a way that was both protective and terrifying. The galaxy had seen hints of their power before, but this intervention would be a lesson in how survival, strength, and strategy combined could reshape the fate of entire civilizations. It was a quiet beginning, a preparation, but it carried within it the seeds of overwhelming change both for the SOS species and for anyone who dared stand in the way of the Deathworlder fleet. The galaxy, vast and full of life, often overlooked the true danger posed by a species born in adversity, hardened by constant struggle, and refined by intelligence and discipline. The Deathworlders were more than warriors. They were a force of balance in a chaotic universe, a species that enforced survival by teaching harsh lessons in strength and strategy. The SOS signal was not just a call for help, it was the spark that would demonstrate how one species, forged in the crucible of a deadly planet, could alter the course of events across light years of space. As the fleet neared its destination, the anticipation was almost tangible. Every pilot, soldier, and strategist understood that the mission was not simply about responding to a call. It was about survival, power, and the expression of everything the Deathworlders represented: efficiency, strength, and unyielding resolve. For the SOS species, the arrival of the Deathworlders would be the turning point between despair and hope. For the Deathworlders, it was another opportunity to prove that a species born in hardship and perfected through discipline could face any challenge, overcome any threat, and emerge as a force no one could ignore. The story of the Deathworlders answering the SOS had begun, but the galaxy was only beginning to witness the full scope of what these beings could do. The combination of their environment, culture, and mindset had prepared them for moments like this. From the harshest landscapes of their homeworld to the cold vacuum of space, they were unstoppable. And as they approached the SOS planet, nothing in the galaxy could prepare anyone for the sheer precision, power, and ruthlessness that would soon be unleashed. The Deathworlder fleet moved swiftly through the empty black of space, cutting across light years with an efficiency and precision that would have astonished any other species. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, not just in terms of speed or firepower, but in the way every system and crew member functioned as part of a perfect, synchronized whole. Pilots were attuned to their ships as if they were extensions of their own bodies, able to execute maneuvers that would have been impossible for any ordinary species. Every soldier aboard the fleet understood the mission with absolute clarity: locate the SOS planet, assess the situation, neutralize any threats, and ensure the survival of the species that had sent the signal. The SOS species had been desperate, sending out transmissions that barely penetrated the void of space. Their words were frantic, layered with fear, and filled with hope that someone stronger would intervene. To the Deathworlders, this desperation was a sign of life struggling against overwhelming odds, something their culture respected deeply, even if they did not feel the same emotions as weaker species. The fleet's leaders analyzed every message, searching for patterns, noting enemy positions, and calculating the scale of the threat. Unlike other species that might have panicked or attempted negotiation, the Deathworlders approached the situation with cold logic, preparing for a response that was swift, efficient, and absolute. As the fleet drew closer to the target system, the scope of the challenge became clear. Scans revealed a planet surrounded by a hostile armada, a force far larger than the SOS species could have defended against on their own. Orbital defenses were compromised, civilian cities lay in ruin, and the invading fleets were moving with aggressive precision, showing tactical coordination that indicated a seasoned enemy. The Deathworlders did not flinch at the numbers or the danger. Instead, they viewed the situation as an opportunity to demonstrate the full extent of their capabilities. Every commander and pilot knew that their training, honed over decades in the harsh crucible of their homeworld, had prepared them for this exact moment. The alien attackers had already learned to fear their prey. They had underestimated the SOS species, assuming that the inhabitants of the planet were too weak to resist effectively. What they did not know, and could not have anticipated, was that their intervention had triggered the attention of a species far stronger than anyone in that system could comprehend. The Deathworlders were not merely coming to defend a civilization. They were arriving as a force capable of reshaping the battlefield, rewriting the rules of engagement, and demonstrating power in a way that would leave lasting impressions across the galaxy. The first challenge the Deathworlders faced was the chaotic state of the battlefield itself. Civilian populations were scattered, hiding in ruined cities, forests, and underground bunkers. Orbital bombardments had reduced major military installations to rubble. Enemy fleets were positioned unpredictably, using every available strategy to maintain control. Every decision the Deathworlders made had to account for both the safety of civilians and the elimination of threats. Despite their reputation for brutality, the Deathworlders were precise. They were aware that indiscriminate destruction could undermine the purpose of the mission. Strength, in their philosophy, was measured not just by victory but by the effectiveness of that victory. To prepare, fleet commanders divided the incoming forces into segments, mapping out possible enemy movements and predicting where resistance would be strongest. Scouts were sent ahead, slipping past enemy lines, observing movements, and reporting in real time. Every piece of information was analyzed immediately, strategies adjusted, and contingencies prepared for threats the Deathworlders had never encountered before. The alien fleet, confident in its numbers and assumed superiority, had no idea that they were being studied, their every maneuver recorded and interpreted by beings whose tactical genius surpassed anything they had faced before. As the Death neared the planet, reports came in from the SOS species themselves. Survivors described attacks on cities, fleets being torn apart, and civilians hiding in fear. The voices in the transmissions were raw with panic, but there was also a glimmer of hope, a belief that someone stronger might intervene before it was too late. The Deathworlders' leaders listened not to emotions but to data, the locations of enemy units, the extent of the damage, and the potential to turn the tide with minimal additional risk. Plans were drawn up that would allow the fleet to strike decisively, neutralize key enemy formations, and provide protection for civilians simultaneously. Despite the clarity of their strategy, the challenge was still immense. The alien attackers had set traps, reinforced their positions, and employed tactics meant to disrupt any incoming force. Mines and automated defense systems littered the planet's orbit, and fast-striking fighter wings moved in unpredictable patterns designed to overwhelm conventional responses. But the Deathworlders thrived on this kind of complexity. They were trained to anticipate, adapt, and counter, transforming threats into opportunities. Every maneuver, every adjustment, every calculated risk was part of the approach they had, honed over countless simulations and real-world encounters. The psychological aspect of the challenge was also significant. The SOS species had little experience with beings as formidable as the Deathworlders. Their hope was fragile, easily shattered by delays or signs of inaction. The enemy, on the other hand, underestimated the fleet's capability, assuming that panic or disorder would slow their intervention. The Deathworlders understood both sides. They moved deliberately, not out of hesitation, but to ensure maximum efficiency when action was taken. Timing, in their philosophy, was as critical as power. Arrive too early and the enemy might escape. Too late and the opportunity to protect the weak would be lost. As the fleet entered the system, the alien forces became aware of their presence. Sensors detected massive ships cutting through space with impossible speed and precision. Enemy commanders attempted to regroup, but the panic of the SOS species, combined with the disciplined advance of the Deathworlders, created a disorienting effect. The Deathworlders used this confusion strategically, coordinating strikes to destabilize the enemy before direct engagement. Even the most seasoned alien officers could not predict the fluidity and adaptability of a Deathworlder fleet. Every action taken by the attackers was anticipated and countered before it could have any meaningful effect. Meanwhile, the SOS species watched from hiding places, barely able to comprehend the scale and precision of what was arriving to protect them. Their relief was tempered by awe and fear. They understood that beings capable of such power were both saviors and a force beyond comprehension. The Deathworlders' intervention was not a negotiation or plea for assistance, it was a demonstration of absolute strength. They operated according to principles completely foreign to most species: protection through dominance, order through overwhelming presence, and efficiency through ruthless logic. Despite the apparent chaos of the battlefield, the Deathworlders remained in complete control. Their strategy was not reactive, but proactive. They predicted enemy movements, pre-positioned forces, and exploited weaknesses that were invisible to other species. The alien attackers, confident in their numerical superiority, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Fleets intended to block the Deathworlders were neutralized before engagement. Planetary defenses were bypassed with surgical precision, and civilian areas were shielded while enemy concentrations were targeted. The challenge of the situation, the desperate SOS, the chaotic battlefield, the cunning enemy was immense. Yet the Deathworlders approached it with unwavering discipline. In the days leading up to the confrontation, the Deathworlder commanders refined their plans, coordinating strike teams, fighter wings, and ground support with meticulous attention to detail. Every crew member understood their role, the sequence of actions, and the contingencies they would enact if plans failed. The fleet's approach was a blend of raw power and tactical genius, a combination that ensured success in situations where less disciplined forces would fail. The SOS species, watching in anticipation, could only hope that the legends they had heard were true. As the moment of engagement approached, the tension within the Deathworlder fleet was not one of fear but of focus. Each soldier, pilot, and strategist had trained for this scenario, and their minds and bodies were aligned toward a singular objective: neutralize the threat and protect the SOS species. Their training emphasized anticipation, adaptability, and relentless execution. Every decision was informed by experience, instinct, and calculated risk. The enemy, unaware of the depth of their preparation, believed they held an advantage. In reality, they were stepping into a trap meticulously constructed by a species that viewed conflict as an art form. The rising challenge, therefore, was not merely the enemy itself but the combination of factors: a chaotic battlefield, a species in need of protection, unpredictable enemy tactics, and the pressure of maintaining precision under immense stakes. Yet for the Deathworlders, this was the natural state of operation. Their environment, culture, and history had trained them for exactly these circumstances. The challenge, far from deterring them, sharpened their focus and heightened their readiness. Every maneuver, observation, and calculation was aimed at converting chaos into control, weakness into survival, and threat into opportunity. The Deathworlders demonstrated not just military superiority, but the application of a philosophy forged on their harsh homeworld: survival through discipline, protection through power, and victory through precision. They were not simply responding to an SOS, they were redefining the battlefield according to their principles. The enemy's confidence, the fragility of the SOS species, and the complexity of the situation were all elements to be managed, not obstacles to be feared. By the time the first skirmishes would begin, the Deathworlders had transformed what seemed like an impossible challenge into a calculated opportunity for decisive action. The stage was set. The SOS species clung to hope. The alien attackers prepared for confrontation, and the Deathworlders approached with unmatched discipline. Every calculation, every decision, and every movement had been made in preparation for the coming battle. The rising challenge had tested their abilities, honed their strategies, and prepared them for the critical moments ahead. The Death were ready to strike, and the galaxy was about to witness a force unlike any it had ever seen. A species whose response to a call for help would combine protection, strategy, and overwhelming power in a way that few could comprehend. The events leading up to the engagement highlighted the essence of the Deathworlders. They thrived on challenges. They respected life that struggled against impossible odds, and they transformed danger into controlled, decisive action. The enemy, and the unpredictable elements of the battlefield all created a rising tide of tension and anticipation. Yet the Deathworlders moved forward with calm efficiency, confident that their preparation, skill, and resolve would overcome any obstacle. The challenge had been set, and the response would be legendary, a demonstration of strength, discipline, and tactical genius that would echo across the galaxy. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived in the system, its presence immediately felt by every species within sensor range. The SOS planet, once quiet and beleaguered, now buzzed with tension and anticipation. From orbit, the Deathworlders scanned the battlefield in detail, their sensors detecting every enemy movement, every reinforcement, every civilian in hiding. The alien attackers, confident in their strength and numbers, had not expected the speed or precision of the fleet. They were experienced warriors themselves, but their experience was rooted in conventional warfare, in predictable tactics, and in opponents who lacked the deadly combination of raw power, intelligence, and coordination that the Deathworlders brought to bear. The first contact was subtle, almost surgical. Scout fighters moved through enemy lines, invisible to the majority of the opposition, observing positions and relaying real-time data back to the main fleet. Each scout reported the location of enemy warships, supply convoys, and strategic installations. The Deathworlders' leaders coordinated this information instantly, adjusting the positions of capital ships, reassigning strike teams, and preparing specialized squads for precision attacks. Unlike other species, who might rely on overwhelming numbers or brute force, the Deathworlders used their advantage in knowledge and timing. They turned the battlefield into a chessboard where every piece moved in exact harmony with a larger plan that the enemy could not comprehend. The aliens attempted to mount a response. Fighter wings surged toward the scouts, hoping to eliminate what they thought were vulnerable reconnaissance units. But the Deathworlders had anticipated this. Interceptors were already in position, waiting in hidden vectors to strike with exact timing. Enemy fighters were caught in a crossfire, their formations shredded before they could execute maneuvers. Some tried to retreat, only to find escape routes cut off by Deathworlder tactics. Chaos erupted among the attackers, a chaos carefully cultivated by the Deathworlders to destabilize their command and control structures. Every move the enemy made played directly into the fleet's hands. Meanwhile, the SOS species watched from hidden shelters and fortified structures on the planet below. They could see the flashes of weapon fire and the movement of enemy ships through their crude instruments, and while they had no real understanding of what was happening, they felt the tide of battle shift. Their hope grew not because of miracles or luck, but because a force of unmatched skill and strength had intervened on their behalf. They could sense the precision with which the Deathworlders operated, a level of control and coordination that was almost terrifying to behold. Every strike, every maneuver, seemed designed to neutralize threats without unnecessary destruction. A balance between efficiency and the imperative to protect life when possible. The escalation intensified as the Deathworlders began engaging the enemy capital ships directly. These vessels were massive, bristling with weapons and shields, and had devastated the SOS species forces for weeks. But against the Deathworlders, they were vulnerable. The attackers' formations were disrupted by precise long-range strikes, targeting engines, weapon arrays, and communication nodes. Enemy ships attempted evasive maneuvers, but every escape route had been predicted and countered. Explosions lit up space as entire squadrons were incapacitated before they could effectively return fire. It was not sheer firepower that won the day, it was the combination of tactical foresight, timing, and ruthless efficiency that defined Deathworlder strategy. On the planet below, civilians and soldiers alike began to understand the scale of the intervention. Cities that had been under bombardment now experienced a strange calm between flashes of destruction and rescue. Enemy bombardments failed as orbital defenses were quickly neutralized. Enemy troop transports were intercepted mid-flight. Key enemy positions on the ground were targeted with precision strikes, disabling their ability to reinforce or reorganize. To the SOS species, it was almost miraculous, but the Death did not consider it magic or luck. They considered it competence honed by generations of survival. On a world that allowed no weakness, the enemy, sensing the shift in momentum, attempted desperate measures. They launched concentrated attacks on the Deathworlder fleet, aiming to break their formation and strike a decisive blow. Massive warships moved together in coordinated patterns. Fighters swarmed in wave after wave, and energy weapons scorched the space around them. Yet the Deathworlders were prepared for these tactics. Shield systems adjusted dynamically to distribute energy efficiently, allowing attacks to be absorbed and redirected without compromising the fleet's integrity. Pilots executed evasive maneuvers with near-perfect timing, while weapon systems struck at critical points with unerring accuracy. Each engagement was a symphony of destruction, orchestrated to maximize effect while minimizing collateral damage to the SOS planet. In the midst of this escalation, a critical moment arrived. The alien flagship, the largest and most heavily armed ship in the attacking fleet, attempted to break through the Deathworlder formation and destroy the SOS planet's primary defenses. Its arrival was dramatic, engines blazing, weapons charging, and the alien captain issuing commands with the confidence of one who believed victory was at hand. But the Deathworlders had anticipated this. Multiple strike teams converged on the flagship simultaneously from different vectors. Coordinated attacks targeted its engines, shields, and weapon systems, exploiting vulnerabilities that only a species with perfect battlefield awareness could detect. In minutes, the flagship was crippled, and its once mighty presence turned into a drifting, burning wreck. The enemy's morale collapsed as their symbol of power was destroyed with terrifying efficiency. The destruction of the flagship marked the turning point of the battle. Enemy formations began to fragment, their coordinated attacks losing cohesion. Panic rippled through their ranks as the Deathworlders advanced systematically, eliminating threats in a precise order. Fighter wings were decimated, capital ships disabled, and supply lines destroyed. The SOS species could finally glimpse the difference between hope and despair, recognizing that their survival was now assured, not by luck or external luck, but by the intervention of a species whose tactics and power were beyond their comprehension. Despite the chaos and destruction, the Deathworlders maintained control over the battlefield. They did not allow emotions or the heat of combat to influence decisions. Every move was part of a larger plan, every strike calculated, and every maneuver deliberate. Their approach was not reckless, nor driven by hatred, was driven by purpose. They sought to neutralize threats while preserving the lives they were tasked to protect. Every action, no matter how devastating to the enemy, was executed with surgical precision. On the ground, the SOS species began to take measures to protect themselves further. Soldiers emerged from hiding to reclaim territory previously lost. Encouraged by the overwhelming support of the Deathworlder fleet, civilians who had feared annihilation now began to evacuate critical areas under cover of the fleet's firepower. Communications improved as enemy networks were systematically dismantled. For the first time in weeks, the SOS species felt the tide of war turn in their favor. The Deathworlders' arrival had not merely stopped the enemy, they had reshaped the battlefield entirely as the engagement reached its peak. The Deathworlders demonstrated another critical skill: adaptability. Enemy tactics shifted constantly, attempting to recover lost ground, surprise the fleet, or exploit perceived weaknesses. But the Deathworlders adapted instantly. Strike teams were reassigned, fighter formations altered mid-flight, and weapon systems retargeted dynamically. Every contingency had been planned for in advance. But the fleet's ability to respond to the unexpected was what truly set them apart. To the enemy, it seemed as though they were fighting ghosts, always one step behind, never able to predict the Deathworlders' next move. The climax of the critical moment came when an enemy formation attempted a desperate strike at the planet itself, hoping to destroy civilian populations and force surrender. The Deathworlders responded instantly. Capital ships moved into orbital positions to intercept transports. Fighter wings engaged incoming squads, and planetary defense systems were reinforced using remote control techniques. The enemy's attack was completely neutralized before it could reach its target. For the SOS species, it was the most dramatic moment of the battle. Their lives and homes were saved in an instant, and the force that had accomplished it remained unseen yet overwhelmingly present on space. The Deathworlder fleet continued to push forward with unstoppable momentum. Enemy ships attempting to flee were intercepted and destroyed, leaving no escape for those who had underestimated the fleet. Systems that had been thought secure were revealed to be vulnerable under the Deathworlders' careful analysis and precise strikes. By the end of the engagement, the enemy had been thoroughly broken, their formations shattered, and their ability to wage war on the SOS species effectively eliminated. The critical moment had passed, and the tide had decisively turned in favor of the defenders. The SOS species, watching from the planet below, began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred. They had survived not by chance but by the intervention of a species that operated with perfect coordination, ruthless precision, and unparalleled strategic foresight. The Deathworlders had transformed what seemed like an impossible situation into a controlled victory, demonstrating that true strength was not merely about numbers or firepower, but about intelligence, planning, and execution. They had arrived in the nick of time, turned the battle, and ensured the survival of those who had sent out a desperate call for help. That as the battle ended, the Deathworlders maintained their disciplined posture. They did not linger to celebrate, and they did not offer unnecessary comfort to the survivors. Their mission was complete. The enemy had been neutralized, the SOS species protected, and the battlefield controlled. The critical moment had tested their abilities, but it had also demonstrated the core principles of their species: discipline, precision, and the ability to convert even the most chaotic situations into predictable outcomes. The escalation had reached its peak and been resolved through skill, coordination, and decisive action. The enemy was defeated, the SOS species saved, and the Deathworlders had solidified their reputation as a force capable of responding to crises with unparalleled effectiveness. The galaxy had witnessed, even if only indirectly, the full scale of their capability, a combination of power, intelligence, and relentless discipline that few could hope to match. The critical moment had passed, but its consequences would reverberate. Enemies had learned the cost of underestimating the SOS species had learned the value of timely intervention by a superior force, and the Deathworlders themselves had demonstrated, once again, the lethal precision that had been honed over generations on their deadly homeworld, proving that when they intervened, the balance of power in any system was irrevocably altered. The battle had finally reached its conclusion. The Deathworlder fleet, having systematically dismantled the enemy forces, now hovered in orbit over the SOS planet with an almost eerie calm. Space around the planet was littered with debris-shattered warships, fragmented fighters, and floating remnants of the enemy's orbital installations. Explosions had ceased, replaced by the quiet hum of the Deathworlder ships as they recalibrated systems, scanned for remaining threats, and ensured that no hostile elements remained hidden. The fleet moved with the same precision it had maintained throughout the battle, but now the focus shifted from aggressive engagement to complete control and consolidation. Every ship, every crew member, knew that their mission was nearing its final stage: total resolution and the protection of those who had called for help. On the planet below, the SOS species emerged cautiously from hiding places, bunkers, and fortified shelters. They had witnessed the turning tide of battle from the shadows, their hopes steadily growing as the enemy faltered. Now, as silence descended, they began to see the scale of what had occurred. Cities that had been under constant bombardment were scarred, but they were no longer under immediate threat. Military installations and defensive positions, previously destroyed or occupied, were now empty, abandoned, or neutralized. Civilians ventured out to survey the aftermath, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, awe, and gratitude. The intervention of the Deathworlders had not merely stopped the enemy, it had wiped out their ability to continue the assault, effectively ending the war in a single, decisive campaign. The Deathworlders moved carefully to ensure that no lingering dangers remained. Scout teams were dispatched across the planet, not just to detect surviving enemy units but to assess environmental hazards created by the conflict. Burned-out areas, damaged cities, and unstable structures were monitored, and the fleet's automated systems helped stabilize key zones where civilians might still be at risk. Unlike other species, which might have celebrated victory and departed without concern for residual dangers, the Deathworlders understood that their responsibility extended to ensuring that survival was sustainable. The SOS species needed a chance to rebuild, and any remaining threats had to be neutralized to make that possible. Enemy forces that had survived the initial onslaught attempted to regroup, but the Deathworlders were relentless. Any remaining warships, vehicles, or combatants were identified and systematically neutralized. The fleet's strike capabilities were distributed intelligently across the battlefield to prevent surprises. Even isolated enemy squads on the ground were detected and eliminated with surgical precision. This was not wanton destruction. It was a calculated effort to ensure that peace and safety could be restored. From orbit to the planetary surface, the Deathworlders exerted total control, leaving nothing to chance. The SOS species, observing the precision of the Deathworlder, began to recognize the patterns of their intervention. Unlike typical warlords or mercenaries, the Deathworlders did not take prisoners for exploitation, did not demand tribute, and did not linger for personal gain. Their intervention was guided by a code: eliminate threats, protect life worth saving, and demonstrate the consequences of aggression. The SOS species slowly began to understand that their saviors operated under a philosophy that was foreign, almost alien, in its logic and purpose. Their survival had been guaranteed, not by negotiation or diplomacy, but by a species whose understanding of strength, strategy, and responsibility far surpassed anything they had known. In the aftermath of the destruction, the Deathworlders coordinated with local leadership to stabilize remaining systems. Communication networks were restored, allowing the SOS species to begin organizing relief efforts, coordinate medical care, and reconstruct essential infrastructure. Automated drones, previously used for offensive operations, were repurposed to provide logistical support. They helped clear debris, transport supplies, and maintain order while the SOS species recovered from weeks of terror and chaos. The Deathworlders' focus on control extended beyond battle. They understood that a system left in chaos could become vulnerable again, so they ensured order before departing. Despite the scale of the operation, the Deathworlders maintained their discipline and restraint. They did not indulge in displays of dominance or unnecessary violence once the mission objectives were complete. Their presence remained intimidating, but their actions were purposeful and precise. Enemy leaders who had survived the battle were either incapacitated or contained to prevent retaliation, ensuring that the SOS species could rebuild without immediate threat. Their strategy demonstrated that true power was not measured by conquest alone, but by the ability to protect, control, and restore balance efficiently. On the planet's surface, civilians slowly began to emerge from hiding, moving cautiously among ruined buildings and broken streets. Families reunited, soldiers regrouped, and communities started organizing themselves to repair damage. Despite the horror they had endured, there was a sense of hope. The SOS species had faced near annihilation, yet they were still alive because of the intervention of the Deathworlders. This hope was fragile, tempered by the visible devastation, but it was real, and it grew stronger with each passing hour as the Deathworlders ensured no hidden threats remained. The scale of the destruction inflicted on the enemy also served a critical purpose. It sent a message, not only to the surviving attackers but to neighboring civilizations that might consider aggression in the future. The Deathworlders' philosophy was clear. Threats to those they protect would be met with overwhelming and precise force. By decisively eliminating the enemy, they ensured that no further attacks could be launched, establishing a lasting deterrent. The SOS species, while grateful, also realized that they had witnessed an intervention unlike any other demonstration of power so absolute that it could not be ignored or challenged lightly. Throughout the resolution, the Deathworlders maintained operational efficiency that was almost clinical in its precision. Every weapon system, every fighter, and every ground unit had been used to maximum effect without excess waste. Collateral damage was minimized, civilian areas protected, and strategic targets destroyed with accuracy. The result was a planet cleared of immediate threats, with survivors safe and infrastructure largely preserved. The Deathworlders had accomplished not just victory in battle, but stability, security, and the preservation of life wherever it mattered most, as the fleet prepared to leave orbit. The SOS species observed the full scale of the Deathworlders' intervention. Their warships, once massive symbols of terror, were reduced to drifting wreckage. Orbital defenses, previously formidable, were dismantled or destroyed. Ground forces that had threatened the planet's survival were incapacitated. The SOS species began the slow process of rebuilding, but they understood that they had survived only because a force unlike any other had acted with precision, discipline, and a singular focus on ensuring their survival. The Deathworlders' departure was as silent and calculated as their arrival. They did not linger to receive thanks or admiration. They did not demand recognition, nor did they seek reward. Their mission was complete, threats neutralized, survivors protected, and the balance of power restored. They moved away from the planet, their fleet dispersing into the vastness of space, leaving the SOS species to begin their recovery and reflect on the magnitude of what had occurred. For the Deathworlders, the operation was another mission executed to perfection, another example of their ability to impose order on chaos and safeguard life through decisive action. In the hours and days following the battle, the SOS species began to take stock of their situation. They surveyed the damage, counted the survivors, and assessed the losses. While the destruction left scars across cities and landscapes, the most critical reality was clear. They were alive, and their enemies were no longer a threat. This was a turning point, a moment where despair had been transformed into cautious optimism. The SOS species began to understand the true value of intervention by a species capable of unparalleled strategy and power, and they started planning for the future with a renewed sense of purpose and security. Meanwhile, in the aftermath of the resolution, the Deathworlders had already begun analyzing the engagement in their fleet systems. Tactical data, enemy patterns, environmental hazards, and operational decisions were all recorded and reviewed. Lessons learned were incorporated into simulations for future missions, ensuring that every operation would refine their already formidable capabilities. The Deathworlders' culture valued constant improvement and adaptability, and even after a flawless victory they sought ways to enhance their efficiency and effectiveness. Every battle, every mission, was a chance to perfect their craft and reinforce their dominance across the galaxy. The resolution of this conflict also had profound psychological effects on both the SOS species and the wider galaxy. The SOS species experienced relief, awe, and deep gratitude. They realized that survival often depended on forces beyond their understanding, and that the intervention of a superior species could change the course of events entirely. Neighboring civilizations observed the aftermath from a distance, recognizing that any aggression against those under the protection of the Deathworlders would be met with swift, overwhelming, and precise retaliation. The resolution established not only immediate security but also long-term deterrence, sending a clear message that strength, discipline, and strategy were not to be underestimated. In the final hours of this phase, the SOS species began to rebuild, aided in small ways by the automated systems left behind by the Death. Hospitals, communication centers, and supply lines were restored. The survivors began to regain their footing, reconstructing homes, fortifying defenses, and returning to their daily lives with a renewed sense of hope. Their gratitude toward the Deathworlders was profound, even if they understood that the visitors from beyond the stars did not seek thanks or recognition. Survival, protection, and restoration had been achieved, and that was sufficient. As the Deathworlder fleet disappeared into the void of space, the SOS species reflected on the scale of what had occurred. They had been saved from near annihilation by beings whose power and discipline exceeded anything they had known or imagined. Their enemies had been decisively neutralized, their cities partially preserved, and their future secured. The resolution of the battle was not only physical but also symbolic. It demonstrated that a species could intervene decisively and restore order without hesitation, compromise, or indecision. It left an indelible mark on all who witnessed it, shaping perceptions of strength, survival, and the consequences of aggression for generations to come. The battle had long ended, yet its echoes lingered across the SOS planet. Where once there had been chaos, fear, and devastation, there now lay cautious, calm, and tentative hope. The survivors, both civilian and military, moved slowly among the remnants of their world, attempting to comprehend the scale of what had happened. The Deathworlders' intervention had been decisive, swift, and absolute, leaving no room for doubt about the outcome. The enemy forces had been completely neutralized, their fleets scattered and destroyed, their ground forces incapacitated or eliminated. And yet, as calm returned, the survivors were left to face the consequences, the physical damage, the loss of loved ones, and the realization that the galaxy was far larger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. For the SOS species, the immediate aftermath was a mixture of relief, grief, and awe. Families reunited where they could, but many mourned the loss of friends, neighbors, and soldiers who had perished during the attacks. Cities lay in ruins, buildings reduced to skeletal frameworks by orbital bombardments and ground skirmishes. Yet, amid the devastation, life persisted. The survivors began to organize themselves, forming small teams to clear rubble, provide food and medical aid, and secure areas that remained dangerous. They had been granted a second chance by forces far beyond their understanding, and every action they took was driven by the knowledge that survival was now possible. In the days following the battle, the survivors reflected on what they had witnessed. The Deathworlders' power had been unlike anything they had imagined. The efficiency of their fleet, the precision of their strikes, and the speed with which they neutralized the enemy left them both grateful and humbled. Stories began to circulate, passed from survivor to survivor, about the incredible skill and discipline of the Deathworlders. Some described ships moving with impossible speed and coordination, weapons striking simultaneously across multiple points, and strategies that seemed almost supernatural in their complexity. Others recounted the silence of the Deathworlders, their lack of celebration, their focus on the mission, and their immediate withdrawal once the objective was complete. It was a type of intervention that was terrifying or inspiring and transformative all at once. The rebuilding process began with careful planning. Though the Deathworlders had neutralized immediate threats, the planet itself had suffered significant damage. Cities that had once thrived were now empty shells. Infrastructure was damaged or destroyed, and resources were scattered or lost. The survivors had to find ways to restore essential services such as water, power, and food supply. They worked in teams, salvaging materials from the debris, constructing temporary shelters, and re-establishing communication networks where possible. Medical teams treated the wounded, while engineers and technicians attempted to restore transportation and energy systems. It was slow, painstaking work, but each small success reinforced the hope that life could continue, and that survival was achievable even after the destruction. The presence of the Death, though long gone, left an indelible psychological imprint on the SOS species. They had witnessed firsthand what it meant to face a threat of unimaginable scale, and to survive only because of intervention by a superior force. The survivors began to understand that their world existed in a galaxy filled with dangers far beyond their comprehension, and that strength, preparation, and strategy were essential for survival. Leaders of the SOS species convened meetings to discuss long-term planning, realizing that they needed to strengthen defenses, train soldiers, and prepare for future threats. They also discussed alliances and diplomacy, recognizing that survival often depended on the ability to secure powerful allies in times of need. Stories of the Deathworlders spread beyond the SOS planet. Neighboring civilizations, who had previously considered exploiting or attacking the SOS species, now reconsidered their positions. Rumors of the fleet's intervention, its precision, and its overwhelming power traveled rapidly through the galaxy. Merchants, diplomats, and spies alike reported the scale of the destruction inflicted on the enemy and the efficiency with which the SOS species had been protected. The Deathworlders had inadvertently sent a message: aggression against weaker species under their protection would result in catastrophic consequences. Even distant civilizations, who had never encountered them directly, but began to view the Deathworlders with caution, respect, and, in some cases, fear for the Deathworlders themselves. The aftermath was a return to routine, but their culture emphasized reflection and analysis. Every mission was meticulously reviewed, battle data was analyzed, strategies were evaluated, and lessons learned were recorded for future operations. Every engagement, no matter how successful, was considered an opportunity to improve. The fleet commanders discussed what had gone well, what could be refined, and how emerging threats might be addressed in the future. In this way, the Deathworlders ensured that their capabilities would only grow stronger, their tactics sharper, and their readiness for the next crisis unchallenged. While the SOS species recovered physically, they also began to recover mentally. Trauma from the attacks, loss, and devastation had left scars on individuals and communities alike. However, the knowledge that they had survived due to intervention by a superior and disciplined force provided them with a renewed sense of confidence. They began to imagine a future where their civilization could thrive once more, learning from the past, preparing for potential threats, and building infrastructure and defenses to ensure that they could withstand challenges independently in the years to come. The psychological impact of survival, combined with the lessons learned from the Deathworlders' intervention, became a foundation for a stronger, more resilient society. The resolution of the battle also prompted reflection. Among military and political leaders of the SOS species, they studied the strategies employed by the Deathworlders, recognizing that success in warfare was not merely about numbers or firepower, but about coordination, intelligence, and timing. They examined the way the Deathworlders had anticipated enemy maneuvers, adapted in real time, and neutralized threats without unnecessary destruction. Military training programs were revised, defensive strategies rewritten, and leadership initiatives implemented to ensure that future generations would be better prepared for conflict. In essence, the Deathworlders had provided not just immediate protection, but a blueprint for long-term survival. As months passed, the SOS species gradually rebuilt their cities and infrastructure. Trade networks were restored, agriculture resumed, and communication systems re-established. Education and research programs, previously disrupted by war, began anew, and communities focused on strengthening societal cohesion. The experience of surviving near annihilation fostered a sense of unity and determination among the population. Citizens who had been divided by fear or panic now worked together with a shared understanding. Survival required collaboration, preparation, and vigilance. This newfound unity, inspired by the intervention of the Deathworlders, became a key factor in the long-term resilience of the SOS species. In the larger galactic context, the aftermath of the battle influenced diplomatic relations and power dynamics. Neighboring civilizations now viewed the SOS species with a mix of caution and respect. Aggressive species reconsidered attacks. Understanding that any threat to the SOS species could invoke catastrophic retaliation, diplomats sought alliances, trade networks were re-evaluated, and the SOS species began to establish connections that would ensure both protection and prosperity in the future. The death intervention had not only secured immediate survival but had reshaped the political and strategic landscape of the region. The SOS species also began to develop cultural narratives around the events that had unfolded. Stories of the Deathworlders' interventions spread through oral traditions, literature, and visual records. The fleet's precision, discipline, and overwhelming effectiveness were immortalized in tales and legends, serving both as a warning to potential aggressors and as an inspiration to future generations. These narratives emphasized the values of strategy, preparation, and strength in the face of adversity, embedding the lessons learned from the intervention into the cultural identity of the SOS species. For the aftermath was not marked by celebration but by quiet satisfaction in a mission accomplished. Their purpose had been fulfilled, the weak had been protected, the threat eliminated, and order restored. They did not linger to observe the rebuilding, for their presence was not required. Their philosophy emphasized efficiency, precision, and the fulfillment of duty above personal recognition or reward. Yet, despite this, they were aware of the lasting impact of their actions. The SOS species would survive, grow stronger, and remember the intervention for generations. And the wider galaxy had been reminded once again of the consequences of underestimating a species that combined discipline, intelligence, and overwhelming power. Reflection on the events also prompted the Deathworlders to consider broader implications. They analyzed enemy tactics, societal weaknesses, and potential future threats to the galaxy. Every engagement was a lesson, not only in strategy but in understanding the dynamics of weaker and stronger civilizations. The intervention had demonstrated that power, when applied with precision and purpose, could protect life while enforcing order. It reinforced their belief in preparation, discipline, and the necessity of maintaining superiority to ensure stability in a universe filled with chaos and unpredictable threats. Meanwhile, the SOS species leaders began implementing reforms based on what they had witnessed. Military training programs were overhauled, emergency response systems strengthened, and strategic planning emphasized the importance of alliances and foresight. The society slowly evolved, no longer naive about the dangers of the galaxy. Knowledge gained from the Deathworlders' intervention became institutionalized, forming the foundation for a stronger, more resilient civilization. They understood that survival depended not only on the protection they had received but also on their ability to prepare, strategize, and act decisively in future crises. The emotional aftermath was profound as well. Survivors experienced a mixture of gratitude, awe, and lingering fear. They had seen forces beyond their understanding, powers beyond comprehension, and strategies beyond imagination. Yet, they had survived. Communities found ways to honor the fallen, memorialize the events, and integrate the experience into their collective memory. The intervention of the Deathworlders became a turning point in their history, shaping perspectives on leadership, strength, and responsibility. It was a lesson in both humility and resilience, a reminder that survival often depended on forces and decisions far beyond what any one species could control alone. As the SOS species continued to rebuild, they also looked outward, considering the wider galaxy with a renewed sense of caution and respect. Trade, diplomacy, and communication were all approached more strategically. They sought alliances, observed neighboring species more carefully, and strengthened their defenses. Knowledge gained from surviving the near destruction influenced decisions across all sectors of society, from governance to education, from military strategy to everyday life. The experience had transformed them from a vulnerable, isolated civilization into one capable of anticipating threats and responding intelligently. For the Deathworlders, the reflection was ongoing. Each mission added to their understanding, sharpened their strategies, and strengthened their discipline. Their reputation as protectors of the weak and absolute enforcers of power continued to grow, spreading across the galaxy. Civilizations now understood the consequences of aggression, the value of strength, and the importance of respecting forces far beyond their comprehension. The Deathworlders' actions ensured that, while the SOS species could rebuild and thrive, the memory of their intervention would also serve as a deterrent to any who might threaten them in the future. The aftermath and reflection of the intervention were intertwined. The SOS species survived and learned, growing stronger and wiser. the galaxy witnessed a demonstration of unmatched precision and power, reinforcing the Deathworlders' position as a force to be reckoned with. Both survivors and observers gained lessons in strategy, resilience, and the necessity of preparation. The events would be remembered, studied, and recounted for generations, leaving a legacy of survival, strength, and the extraordinary impact of intervention by a superior force. Through these reflections, both the SOS species and the Deathworlders understood a fundamental truth of the galaxy: power, when wielded with purpose and precision, that could protect life, shape outcomes, and leave an enduring mark on history. The SOS species would continue their journey forever changed, while the Deathworlders would continue theirs, ready for the next challenge, their discipline and strength sharpened by experience, their legend cemented across the stars.